And a very warm and a blessed welcome to all of you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us for another of Catholic Distance University's CDU Presents webinars. Tonight we have a rather special webinar. We are marking a rather important, significant anniversary in the history of Catholic Distance University. I'm talking about our 35th anniversary. If we go all the way back to 1983, CDU began as the first catechetical distance learning institute in the United States. I'm going to have a conversation tonight with several very important leaders of Catholic Distance University, including, I'm especially delighted to say, our president, Dr. Mary Ann Evans Mount. Good evening. Mary Ann?
I'm sorry, I don't have any audio.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
So my audio isn't working.
Okay.
So, and I don't know, Matthew, what you asked of me, but okay. I'm presuming that you're probably wondering about the history.
Yes, I am.
Okay, it just came back. Great. Actually, the idea for CDU began in 1982 with Father John Harden, who was a Jesuit priest who was very well known in catechetics, and he was teaching at a graduate school for religious sisters, and he told the story that Blessed Paul VI had come from a publishing family and was very concerned about the church engaging with media to attract young people going forward. And he brought together a number of very influential leaders, including Father Harden, to the Vatican. And so Father was very compelled to fulfill this request of Blessed Paul VI. So in his course, he organized a special seminar on media, which I was fortunate enough to take, and we explored ways of using media, and Father Harden asked me to contact the former director of Loyola University in Chicago, who was the director of their correspondence study division that closed in 1982. So I did that and asked her who I should contact, and she said, you need to contact the Seventh-day Adventists, whose headquarters is in the DC area. So I did that, spent a day with them, and discovered they were offering a complete curriculum of K through 12 and the first 2 years of college, all by correspondence, because of their vast number of missionaries. So at the end of the day, I said, who should I contact to learn more about this? And they suggested I contact Michael Lambert, who was the executive director of the Accrediting Association for Correspondence Education. So I called him, and he said, well, I'm Catholic, and I've been waiting a long time to hear from the church. I'm delighted to talk to you, he said. And I said, well, could you come to a meeting this afternoon with the bishop of the Diocese of Arlington? And he said, sure. So he came, and Father Harden was explaining the idea of using correspondence courses to educate catechists in the diocese. And Mr. Lambert said, Bishop, you need to do this for the whole country, because there is no Catholic correspondence education, and many, many Catholics who are hungry to learn more about their faith, to study sacred scripture, are going to Protestant schools. So that was really the impetus for starting CDU, and it was established in May. The board met in May of '83. We opened our doors to the world August 22nd, 1983. And the plan was to contact the Vatican, and in those days, there were pontifical institutes that were recognized, particularly for the laity, to alert them that these institutes would be teaching solid Catholic teaching. So CDU was the first and only pontifical institute. The representatives at the Vatican were very excited at this idea. And then a number of years later, the terminology changed and we became a catechetical institute.
Well, if I'm remembering right, I think you started basically with 2 employees and 2 part-time professors. Is that right?
Yes, actually, you're right. We started with 1 faculty member.
One faculty member.
Right, but that quickly grew.
So what was it like to have started something like this? The task must have been incredibly daunting, just from the standpoint that this had never been tried before.
Well, I was privileged to be working there from day one and in helping Father Hardin to execute this plan. But I really didn't have the vision at that point. I don't think any of us did, because we certainly did not know that the internet was awaiting us. We actually went online in 2000, but I think it was the early 90s when we began to realize what was waiting for us, this great gift of, instant global connection and community that was awaiting us, and what a beautiful instrument for Catholic higher education.
Yeah, well, thank you for that initial background, because I think it's always important to know where we came from, especially as an institution like this. So I want to bring into our conversation two other important figures. Sister Brendan Zajac, good evening.
Evening. Good evening, Matthew.
Anyone who's taken a lot of webinars or tuned into a lot of the CDU webinars knows very well the face and voice of Father Bevel Bramwell. Good evening, Father.
Hey there.
As well as for anyone who has also taken a webinar previously for purposes of our discussion tonight, we want you also to take part. If you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a dashboard. And if you scroll down in that dashboard, you'll see that there's a section there for questions. We really want to hear from you tonight. I'll be listening and tuning into your questions and handing them off to the panelists tonight. For a little more detail on Sister Brendan, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself for our viewers who may not be familiar with you?
Thank you. I am a sister of Notre Dame, and I live at our mother house in Chardon, Ohio, in the snow belt, very near to Lake Erie. But I'm privileged at this point in my ministry to serve as Assistant Academic Dean of St. Mary's Seminary and Graduate School of Theology, which is the major seminary for the Diocese of Cleveland. In addition to being Assistant Academic Dean, I'm also the Registrar, and I also support the educational technology throughout the seminary. They love me when I start digging up the front yard to lay fiber optic cable. In addition, I serve as a professor of pastoral theology and currently teach a course for our seminarians on evangelization and catechesis. In simple language, I teach them how to teach. So as priest catechists, they can make their mark with their people. Thank you.
Yeah. And Father Bevel, I know you are one of our most popular theology professors. So what are you teaching at the moment?
I wouldn't know about that, but anyhow. Sorry, your question?
Well, I was saying, what have been some of the most recent courses that you've taught for us?
Sacraments, Theology of Church. I'm doing an intro to Thomas Aquinas at the moment. My background is really ecclesiology, and so I did my doctorate in that, and kind of am still working in that field and trying to bring what I've learned in that field into each one of the subjects, so that, for example, we don't treat baptism as some kind of private family ceremony. There's a whole lot more which is happening, and we have to help people to really be in awe of what is happening.
Well, you teach ecclesiology, and one of the great discussions that we've had in the last 50 years, certainly since the close of the council, is the church. And I know, Marianne, one of the great concerns that was present in the pontificate of John Paul II was helping to overcome a lot of the confusion among Catholics, but even Catholic educators coming out of the Second Vatican Council. Could you talk a little bit about some of the concerns that were present in the early 1980s and how you saw Catholic education, faithful education, could respond to that?
Well, I think there was a lot of confusion, and we know that John Paul II was a very formidable part of the Second Vatican Council, and I think the Constitution on the Church, Lumen Gentium, which made it very clear that we are all called to be saints, and there is a distinct vocation of the laity, and in order to fulfill that vocation, lay people must be educated and informed. And I think that was the motivation of Bishop Welsh to support this enterprise and to make Catholic higher education, particularly education in the faith, accessible to lay people, recognizing that the lifestyle of the typical lay person is very hectic, and to think that lay people can easily travel to a campus to study is not realistic. And so I think that the Second Vatican Council was really a very fundamental effort for the foundation of CDU. I think that was really instrumental. And of course, the other piece of that is to make sure that what adult learners are studying is truly what has been handed on from the beginning. It's the beautiful truths of our faith. And so, the combination, I think, of doing it through distance education, but making it so rich in the truths of the faith, were really the hallmarks of CDU.
And what were some of the core principles that you brought to bear in trying to craft an initial curriculum, an initial study plan for students? Because this is a very difficult era. I think people often don't appreciate how confused things were coming out of the 1970s.
We were very blessed with our faculty. Father Hardin became ill, and Father William Kiefer, who was a professor at Georgetown and a very close friend of Bishop Welsh's and a collaborator with the Diocese of Arlington, became the academic director. And he really guided the curriculum. In fact, he used to say that it reminded him so much of his own seminary training. It was systematic. It was rich, it was authentic. Of course, it wasn't at the level, as in those days, it was really at an undergraduate level, and we were not offering degrees, but it was very faithful to church teaching, and it was, it used the language of the church, which for many lay people was something brand new.
Yeah, Sister, let's stay on that for a second, because there's the intellectual faith, there's the cultural faith, there's the emotional faith. Those really have to work together in a kind of symphonic quality, don't they?
Exactly. The very first point that I would like to make is that all of learning comes about as a result of an encounter. And in the case of CDU or theological education or the journey of faith, that becomes, first of all, an encounter with Christ. Many times an individual can have an emotional encounter, and that's wonderful. We are both body and soul, and we are touched deeply by an encounter with Jesus Christ. But that faith cannot remain at the emotional level. And this is where CDU provides a very, very rich opportunity to take that emotional faith and give it an intellectual structure that will stand the test of time. It's one thing to have that wonderful, warm feeling, but it's another thing when that feeling isn't there, and there are trials and there are challenges that daily life and interactions with others would bring to that. So the idea of adding an intellectual faith to an emotional faith is very, very important if we're going to be training lifelong Catholics. And that's what CDU is trying to do, to think logically, and theologically about the faith.
Well, Father, let's that notion of encounter strikes me as something very significant in any theological study, having that encounter with Jesus Christ, but doing so within the setting of academics, which itself then brings its own requirements and demands. But talk about that encounter that we as those who study and hopefully teach theology need to have themselves, but then to impart.
Well, if you look at any writings on Catholic universities, and obviously we've had great documents on universities going all the way back to Leo XIII at least, and all of the popes are very much aware that human beings are dealing with a faith that has become incarnate in Jesus Christ. So body, soul, divinity, Christ walked the earth and actually encountered other people. He really treasured the fact that human beings were created in a certain way and consequently could be met in a certain way. And so you have all the gospel literally giving you encounter after encounter, and that incarnational experience builds the community that finally with Pentecost becomes what we understand as church. But it is still a community of encountering, and it's kind of a very complicated dynamic because the church is called the body of Christ, and yet it also is bringing us closer to Christ. So if you take somebody like John Paul II, what he did was to envisage a university that is a part of the church, hence the name of the document. Part of the church being a small microcosm of many of the aspects of church. Particularly, he emphasizes that we are meeting Catholics who are living out their faith. Either they're sitting in the pews, sitting in the benches, sitting at their computer screens, and they are paying attention to, relating to, and this is where Sister is such an expert, the whole idea of encountering in the electronic media. But the professors are also expected to be Catholics, living their Catholic life and showing beyond simply the maybe a 1 hour session of a class that they in fact know what Catholicism is. When they bring their kids on campus and all the rest of it, they know how they radiate Catholicism. And so it's up to us as a community, in this case, a distant community, to build this community. Then the other side of it is, because the whole world that we are in and we are studying is made through the divine word. So literally, each university, which is Catholic, becomes an explosion of the presence of Christ in using all the powers that Sister was adverting to just now of the human being, where we have an intellect, we have a will, we have our bodies, we have our emotions, and all of these are gradually schooled to help us to be disciples. And it's actually an interesting sideline that a lot of people whom we train then become people who work for the church.
Yeah, I've been struck over the years. I think is it about a dozen or so former students have gone on to the seminary. Is that right, Marianne?
Yes, I'm not exactly sure the number, but it is quite remarkable. The number of graduates of our MA program who have then gone on to the seminary and been ordained. That's true.
Well, I remember it was well more than a decade ago when Dr. Robert Royal I think it was serving at the time as graduate dean for CDU, first invited me to join the faculty to take part as an educator. And we were having a discussion about sort of some of the philosophical and theological underpinnings of CDU. And he made a statement that remained with me to this day. He said, "We're Catholic. We're simply Catholic." And I understood that what he meant by that was that we take as our presuppositions of who we are and what we teach to be authentically Catholic. And taking that then as sort of a launching point, the values of CDU, you have said to me on a number of occasions that Jesus Christ is at the center of our values as an institution. In an era, though, when a lot of Catholic institutions, a lot of institutions of Catholic higher education have perhaps forgotten some of their core values, and we haven't. And let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's important to stress the presuppositions that we have for how we view education, but also how we view Catholic education. So, Mary Ann, could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start out about that. You know, I think one aspect of what we do is really an integrated Catholic education. Sister was talking about the mind and the soul and the heart, and I think our approach to education is, first of all, to have a very challenging academic and intellectual work, but we have a student life center where students have the opportunity to meet each other even before classes start. And because we are an online university, we are a global learning community. They have a cafe where they can get together and they can talk about their families, they can talk about their work, they can talk about their volunteering in their parishes and dioceses. There's a great openness talking about the spiritual life as well. And of course, the content of our curriculum really does bring us to that deep encounter with Jesus Christ. But then the online experience gives us the opportunity to share with one another in very unique ways because of the online experience, which is different from the classroom. And then to be able to meet each other in a more casual atmosphere in the learning center, and then to interact with faculty who are also passionate about their faith and who also have very interesting apostolic activities in their own lives. So I think that the university reverberates with the heart of Christ, and it enriches this very, very vibrant learning community.
Well, Sister, on that point, some of the ways that we can characterize an authentically Catholic university, how would you describe that?
Well, coming off of what you and Father Bramwell had just said, Catholic is a noun. It's not an adjective when we talk about a Catholic university.
You
Catholic
could even argue
means,
it's a verb sometimes.
Very much so, yes. But Catholic names the teachers as witnesses, and it gives students dignity. It calls parents to be partners. And most of all, it provides the supernatural vision, which is really the first cornerstone of a Catholic educational institution. It means that we are presenting before our students their destiny to be saints. You know, the history of Catholic education at any level, sooner or later, you're going to come across a saint, whether that's Elizabeth Ann Seton, the patron of CDU, St. John Neumann, Catherine Drexel, and St. John Bosco. There are always saints in its founding, but there's also the destiny that everyone is called to, which is a transcendent destiny based on the revelation of the truth of Jesus Christ. That leads to a Catholic anthropology and a Catholic worldview. It's, as I tell my students, it's putting on glasses that say Catholic and we begin to think with a Catholic imagination. And that changes everything, because you cannot come in contact with the power of the church's faith tradition and its 2,000 years of intellectual tradition through the fathers of the church, Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, and we can go right down the line to Benedict XVI and Francis. And it's that tradition which is handed on to us as a living tradition, and in which then we do find that encounter. But then that leads to the whole idea of community. You know, there's an institutional commitment to Catholicity. Yes, we have to have individuals who are committed Catholics, but a Catholic educational institution has to have an intellectual and an institutional commitment. Everyone must be imbued with that vision. Everyone must be communicating that vision and serving in their particular role out of that vision. And that really is what makes an institution a Catholic institution.
Yeah, Father, we have anyone who visits the CDU website and spends much time scrolling through our documentation, our history, our description of who we are, you run across a title almost immediately that's quoted extensively, and I'm talking about Ex Corde Ecclesiae. That, of course, the document from St. John Paul II on Catholic universities, on Catholic education from, I think, 1990, is one of those bedrocks, something that I know we've been talking about as faculty members, as administration people, from the day that I arrived at CDU, and it's something that is constantly discussed. So let's focus a little bit here on Ex Corde. First, could you give a description of what it is exactly, why it's so important? But then let's, for all of us, let's think a little bit about why it's so important for CDU as a bedrock for our institutional life.
Well, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, it literally means from the heart of the church, and it was written in 1990 by John Paul II, and it comes out of a milieu. He, of course, had a lot of contact with universities, both in his own formation as bishop and so forth, and then in his travels as Pope. He had a lot of information gathering going on around him, and discovered that Catholic institutions needed to be stimulated again with the basic principles. And so what he did was write this document, which just pulled out a few comments about, he tells us, for example, that the characteristics of the institution are, first of all, the Christian inspiration, which the sister was speaking about, reference to all human knowledge, again, something that our denigrators have always blamed the church for, that we don't pay attention to the whole of human knowledge. And of course, this goes back to the Enlightenment, and we could spend hours on that.
We actually did do a webinar on the Enlightenment, if you remember, just
yeah, no, we've touched on these things, you know, but also the idea of fidelity, this continuous faithfulness that responds to the two sources of revelation, scripture and tradition, and brings them to bear on the wonderful, wonderful research that is going on in so many different areas of knowledge. And then lastly, to serve the people of God and the church. The idea that once people have been through this really global vision, which is what Sister was referring to there, this wonderful integration of knowledge, that is another one of the things that he calls for in the document, then they are ready and very well prepared to be able to join essentially the mission of the church, because the church is, as Paul VI said, an expert in humanity. And we know that not because we're such great people, but because God has been revealing what human beings are through scripture and through the tradition in ways that go far beyond a simple psychology course or a simple sociology course or any one of the other ologies. What we discover is what it really means to be human. And a lot of what we are saying about really being human means we've got to bring the power of Christ to bear on that, because we cannot realize the fullness of humanity on our own. Otherwise, we would be Pelagians, and we're not. Mm-hmm. So what you have in this document, two halves, theology at the beginning, and essentially a theology of the university community. And John Paul, you can see his experience just kind of trickling through each one of the lines. The second half is norms, and that's a more judicial part of the document, which is designed to bring universities into line with essentially the renovation of seminaries and certain kinds of Catholic institutions, so that everybody is on the same page and going in the same direction, training their students, obviously for different missions, but missions in the same church.
Sister, do you have anything to add to Father's comments? I think we may have lost you there for a second. Sister, are you there?
Sister. Can you hear us?
Looks like we lost Sister a little bit. So, Marianne, can you?
Father, what you were talking, it reminded me of the first document of John Paul II, which was Redemptor Homines, and in there he says that man cannot fully know himself without knowing Jesus Christ. I think that is really kind of at the heart of a Catholic university, and certainly our mission at CDU.
Yeah, so we have John Paul II helping us to appreciate fully what an authentic Catholic university should look like. We have as well John Paul II, who helped all of us understand the Second Vatican Council in its true mission. We have an understanding, for example, of what Pope Benedict referred to as a hermeneutics of continuity and reform of John Paul II and Benedict, and trying to implement the Second Vatican Council very fully and authentically. But then there's the challenge of actually educating, taking all of those documents and distilling them in a way that the world can fully appreciate and take to both heart and mind, is to go back to one of the points we had earlier about how intellectual faith, emotional faith, and cultural faith. So the challenge then, it strikes me, is communicating the truth and beauty of the faith to the modern world. And that's where it strikes me the digital continent becomes so very important. And Marianne, when we started our conversation tonight, you were discussing the origins of the Catechetical Institute, where everything was on paper. And anytime I'm visiting our headquarters in West Virginia, I always love to look at the paper courses that we used to have. It must have been very impressive and a lot of fun to get the box of all of the binders with the material when we would send them out for students. But then we have this massive shift to the digital continent, to the internet. How did you reach that decision? At what point you had to pull the trigger and say, it's time to do this? What were some of the thoughts that you had in just the mechanics, but also, again, the sort of the theological and spiritual underpinnings of making that decision?
Well, I could talk all night about that, but I will just mention that in 2000, we did a pilot program with the Diocese of Arlington. And we had 100 volunteers, 2 catechists from each parish in the diocese, and we did a 3-week online interactive seminar. And the CDU staff had seen a demonstration of a seminar, and we thought, wow, this is very interesting. I thought we could use this to train catechists to use in our own curriculum. So we did this 3-week pilot, and for all of us, the staff, the faculty, all of the catechists, these 100 catechists, being online and being able to talk to one another in addition to learning from the professor. And of course, at that point, it was pretty well text-based. We didn't have the beautiful graphics that we have today in our courses, but I remember 2 military wives who were catechists in different parishes reconnected after many years. They apparently had been assigned with their husbands to the same military base many years before and had lost contact. So when they were on this pilot, they met each other again, and it was so exciting. And I can remember not wanting to go to bed. Just the conversation kept going, all text-based, but
right.
Amazing. 100 different people and the faculty, professor talking together. Oh my goodness, it was it was magic. It was unbelievable. So when we did that, we said, this is it. This is the future. And as wonderful and transformative as correspondence education can be, because you're interacting with very rich content and you're interacting with a professor guiding you, to do that and to have other students in your class and learning from them, particularly at the graduate level. I think the kind of dialogue can be very, very enlightening and transformative, because you're dealing with graduate students who are also professional in their own domains, and so it just adds a whole new dimension of human interaction and dialogue that is so rich. Now, I have to say, truthfully, I've met some of our students who did both. They were in the correspondence mode, and then we jumped into the online. And a couple of them have said to me, I really, with my learning style, I kind of liked those boxes coming in with the courses. It was like Christmas every time I opened a box. And it was just something nice and controlling about having that course in a 3-ring binder. So, it's a different experience today. It's a different modality, but we're very insistent in our online courses that everybody has to participate in that ongoing conversation.
Not to mention, though, it's somewhat technologically intimidating to sort of launch out into the digital continent, to coin that great phrase from Pope Benedict XVI. And for students, I know we have a lot of adult learners, and I want to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But Sister, the significance of the digital world, and I know you talk a lot about the digital divide that can exist, and the opportunities then that not just education, but specifically Catholic education can provide by the use of the means of digital communications.
Yes, a very, very important topic. You use the word digital divide. The fact that technology can be divided into the haves and the have-nots, and we know that even those that we work with, some are technologically challenged, others run ahead of the pack there. But the important thing is that we have to come to a point where technology is seen as a gift of the Spirit. John Paul II said that, especially in a number of his writings, and also that flows from Inter Mirifica from the Council. But the point is that,
which for those who may not be familiar, which was the Council's document on social communications. Which we should stress immediately, that the Council called on the Church and all Catholics to use all the means of social communications at our disposal. And so we embrace that spirit by embracing fully the digital world.
Right, and more we're finding that the entire world is really the digital continent. And so to systematically deprive large groups of people, for example, in some of our mission countries, from access to the media. This becomes a moral issue, but we are very blessed at CDU to have an infrastructure which is readily available to the students, and it becomes transparent so that the content is really what is being emphasized, the interaction, the encounter, as Marianne and Father have mentioned. I mean, we can go on and talk about the popes of the electronic age and their contribution. And I think what we've seen is the church has moved from the vigilant eye, going back several hundred years, to a title of an encyclical, a vigilant eye over books and movies and radio, to embracing the media as this vehicle of the Spirit to this generation and to this millennium. So I think we have an obligation to encourage and assist those that we work with, those that we serve, our students, to really take advantage of the power of the media to create the kinds of encounter that we're experiencing right now with all of those who are listening to us and with one another, where the Spirit really does move among us as a result of social communication.
Yeah, Father, can you build on that a little bit?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is to say, staying with this idea of encounter, we have to appreciate that human beings have brains, and consequently the brain is part of the encounter. So John Paul, 8 years after Ex Corde, wrote Fides et Ratio to explain and actually deal with a major problem that goes back to the probably 1700s at least, of separating out reason as if we can, which is already a mistake, separating it from faith, which the Enlightenment considered really to be a nuisance and a distraction, and trying to have some kind of literally intramundane idea of reason. Mm-hmm. And it just got so tired as a method of using reason that, in fact, we're still watching the damage today in places that use that pathetic idea of reason as if we can separate it on its own. He said you needed faith and reason so that you could both believe and understand. The faith helped our understanding, the reason helped our belief. And so we have this beautiful acceptance, if you like, of the real way that human beings are made, instead of the artificial idea that comes from the 1700s. And so you have this magnificent appreciation for the full intellectual powers of the human being. And it's up to the university to be able to say, okay, we really do understand what students are, and we really do understand what professors are, and we know that there's going to be faith and reason in this dialogue backwards and forwards, and we're just going to set up the conditions so that the best dialogue occurs. And that, I think, is another piece of the puzzle there.
Yeah, well Marianne, though, the task then is trying to be faithful to the teachings of the church, but then presenting them in a way that the modern mind can grasp and fully apprehend. And the use of digital means then brings with it its own set of requirements, doesn't it, in terms of modalities and presentation and access for students. It strikes me that there's a kind of striking a balance, isn't there, between cutting edge technology, but also not losing sight of content.
Oh, absolutely. And it reminds me of something that Pope Francis said in one of his World Communications Day messages. he said that communication is human, it's not technological. And so obviously our students are at the heart of what we do and why we do what we do. And I think as an online university, it behooves us to really understand the pedagogy of what goes on in an online class, in an online environment, and how we bring out the unique qualities of that, and how do we bring out the best learning and the richest experience for the students. And, you know, I frequently say we're not trying to replicate a classroom, because we're not a traditional brick and mortar classroom. We cannot do that. And if you look at the research, in 2008, the Department of Education did a meta-analysis of all of the studies comparing online to face-to-face classes. And it was very interesting. What they came up with is that for the adult learner, who are our students, the online is slightly better, stronger learning outcomes from the classroom. The most successful model is the hybrid, which takes advantage of both the classroom and the online, which, you know, a number of institutions are using and exploring. But it's interesting that the online provides, in my opinion, a very contemplative experience that is very conducive to studying philosophy and theology, religious education, exploring the faith, because the conversation is not immediate in the classroom where that really favors the extroverts. In our classes, everybody has to participate, and you have a week to craft what you want to contribute to the conversation. You can do it every day. You do it at least once a week. But you have the opportunity to edit what you say before you say it. You can read what others have said. You can pray about it. You bring in your reading. And so it's very thoughtful. And it's richer than, generally speaking, at least in my own experience as a student, I find that the online conversation is generally richer. So, you know, I think those are advantages. Being able to hear from everyone in a class, not just the extroverts, I think is a great benefit.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the fact that anyone who thinks that in a sort of an online discussion room, you don't have some pretty intense conversations.
Yes.
Just spend some time in any of our discussion rooms, and you'll find very quickly that it isn't simply regurgitating course material. We don't exactly have fights, but we certainly have debates and some really intense conversation, which is really what you want. But go ahead, Father.
The other point that Marianne kind of just touched on is that not only do you get a conversation, but you also cannot have any wallflowers, because you know exactly when each individual in the class is active. And that is incredibly important in terms of, first of all, teaching them, but also expanding their experience and the experience of the others in the class who may just be a lot more active and a lot more extroverted.
Right. Well, something, go ahead, Marianne.
I was just going to say, the rhythm of an online class is different from a brick and mortar class. And as you were saying, Matthew and Father, with a conversation, it can go in a completely different direction very quickly. And so our faculty, who are very, very hardworking, will say that they're on every day, and they almost have to be, because the conversation can really be directed in a very positive way, but in a very negative way, or really a way that isn't conducive to learning. So the faculty are really key, and they work very hard, and they are engaged all the time.
Well, yeah, you can slip into the thought that somehow you need to be sort of like a traffic cop in the conversations. But I learned a long time ago that it's more like an air traffic controller, because you have a lot of ideas, a lot of planes of ideas coming in from all directions. You just have to make sure that they're not just passing each other, but they're landing safely and they're depositing their cargo to torture the image a bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
one of the points that you made, and Sister, I wanted to pick up on this with you, is there's a motto, I know, Marianne, that I've heard you say, that CDU serves the underserved and educates minds and hearts to serve the underserved. And it strikes me that in this digital approach to education, we are serving those who are underserved, but we're also giving that access to people literally all over the world who otherwise would not be able to undertake this sort of a quality education.
Yes, very much so. CDU and especially the board has committed to taking Pope Francis's challenge very seriously of reaching the margins and reaching the periphery. One of the things during the Year of Mercy, the Pope had asked for a specific action by Catholic communities to commemorate the Year of Mercy. And we considered, what could we do at CDU? And so with the help of Archbishop Broglio, we identified the poorest dioceses around the United States, and poor in the sense of not having access to Catholic education at the graduate level. And we've offered them 2 scholarships, am I right, Marianne? 2 scholarships.
Yes. Well, we offered 1 scholarship per diocese. And we offered that 5 dioceses. Mm-hmm.
Right. And what that has allowed the bishop to do is to target a lay leader that may already be serving in his diocese, but now can actually study and get a degree in theology. So that has been a very important mission initiative for us. Another way that CDU has reached to the margins is by its outreach and support of the incarcerated. Now, this is going to seem like we're going back to the correspondence days, but it's not exactly. CDU's outreach makes available to the incarcerated print-based courses, both continuing education at a very, very minimal cost, and also then, if they would qualify and are able to do so, to even pursue the degree. In my experience as an adjunct faculty for CDU, I was teaching a course in sacraments, and at the same time, I was asked to correct the papers of some students who were taking it in print. And in the course of engaging or encountering individuals in their papers, I began to wonder, are some of these students incarcerated? And I checked it out, and sure enough. And that began a lengthy correspondence with an inmate, which eventually led to his earning a master's in theology, summa cum laude. And I was privileged to go down to the prison with cap and gown and present his degree. And that was perhaps one of the most moving experiences, because here is a man in prison who is able to do what Father Bramwell so eloquently described, of combining faith with the experience of reason, because he reasoned to the truth of the Catholic Church. And CDU played a very important part in helping him, as he would say, catch up with 2,000 years of reading. And I just want to read to you what he said about CDU, because I think it's illustrative of just how profound not only the modality is, but also the contact. He said, CDU provides a wonderful, faithful Catholic education. It also offers the means to put into practice the theoretical wisdom of the fathers, thus bringing about a lively faith. The professors and administration work closely with the student in overcoming the numerous twists and turns presented by prison rules, lockdowns, and prison life in general. And most of all, CDU strengthened my faith, taught me to think logically and theologically, and most of all, changed my heart and helped me become the man I now am. So CDU has a profound effect on the inmates who are able and who pursue any level of education with CDU. Now, most recently, I believe it was through a grant, CDU has been able to add Catholic content to the very limited tablets which are available to inmates across the country. And in doing so, this free content, which is loaded on the tablet, is able to be accessed by any inmate. And I believe when this was first done last spring, several hundred inmates took advantage of the Catholic content. And this is a very, very important effort, which again addresses that ministry to the periphery that the Holy Father calls for.
Yeah, well, what Pope Francis talks about the periferia, the peripheries, as you note, but it's also worth stressing that I think CDU over the years has had, Bill, correct me, Marianne, but I think graduates from about 60 plus countries, is that right?
We've had students in 60 countries. I'm not sure they all graduated.
Sure.
And as you know, Matthew, we say we have something for everybody. So we have a very
Right.
broad, non-credit continuing education program. We offer certificates for catechists, study of scripture, all kinds of courses, but then we also have our degree program and our credit-bearing certificate program.
Well, one of the reasons that
it's hard to say, who's taken what, but
right.
CDU has been present in 60 countries.
Well, I stress that because by the very definition then of a digital university is to be able to reach places that would otherwise be completely inaccessible to a Catholic university, but conversely for students to find us in ways that would be unthinkable. I know over the years I've had a number of students who have been in the military. I know we have a beautiful relationship with the Archdiocese for Military. The Archdiocese of the Military, of course, with Archbishop Broglio, who's been so incredibly supportive of CDU. But there's something deeply edifying about working and sort of guiding the studies of officers and soldiers in far-flung corners of the world. I'm thinking especially of places like Afghanistan and Iraq during what have been some very difficult times for U.S. military around the world. Talk about what that means and Father, chime in, because I know you have a lot of students who are around the world. What it's like to deal with students from literally all over the world, and yet we have that wonderful common thread that ties everything together of our love for the faith and our desire to deepen our knowledge of the faith, especially on an academic level.
Well, the faith is ultimately a person, as Sister started out saying right at the beginning. We're encountering Jesus Christ through Scripture and the tradition of the Church. And what you find, or what I found with military who have been in my classes, I've had some who simply tell me, Father, I'll be out of touch for the next 2 weeks. And they're on some kind of assignment. I don't ask any more than that. And I just say, let me know when you're back and we will sort out a way to cover the work that was done in those 2 weeks. The other kind of student experience that I get a lot of is students using the class, and it could be something on Introduction to the Faith by Joseph Ratzinger or whoever, but the point is they use that to get their heads out of the game because they're in such a violent environment all the time, and it kind of gives them a time out to be able to do some normal work at a pace they can handle, and they can converse with normal students in the class, and then they can shut down their computers and go back to their assignments. And so it's a whole human kaleidoscope of things that are going on here, which is simply caused by throwing the course out there onto the internet.
Yeah, and to look also at students, not just around the world, but certainly around the United States. One of the things that I have found over the years is that so many of our students are adult learners who have come back to education, who are trying to finish a degree, perhaps, or to go to graduate theology for a change of career. Some of them may be approaching retirement or change of career as they move on in life. But so many of them have families, a full-time job, and yet they're undertaking what is this enormous task in many cases, especially of graduate school. Uh, that intimidation factor again, but also that determination to do this, knowing full well the burden that they're taking on, but also knowing that they have the support of their family to do it. It's a pretty remarkable experience to have with students. Marianne?
Yes, I have known graduate students who have said, I'm in this program and I don't know exactly why, but I really felt the Holy Spirit pushing me to do this, and I know that I will figure this out at some point. And some of them have said what a great example it has been to their children at home. We also always commend families when anyone graduates, because no one does it by himself or herself. The family has to support what they are doing because it is a huge undertaking. And I marvel at the discipline of our students. I'm just thinking of one of our MA graduates who would do his studying very early in the morning because he did not want to interfere with family life. And he was on top of his assignments and, very punctual and very, very good student. 12% of our graduates are physicians. And I think of the responsibilities of our physician students and how they manage make that decision. And it's not just to read a book or take a course, but no, they want a systematic theological education so that they can articulate and live out the faith fully. It really, I'm very, very inspired by the example of our students.
Well, and to that point, we have a question from John Hipsley this evening. He's saying, thank you for a very engaging and informative discussion. I have a question. Is there a formal course that trains students in the practice of critical thinking within the curriculum? Then he goes on to say, to qualify my question, is there an awareness of how to train students in how to think as contrasted with what to think? Father Bevel, I notice you're smiling already, so I'll toss to you.
Yeah, I don't handle this course, but there is a philosophy for theology course, because we do find that students sometimes, it's not always, I'm amazed how good analysis is done by a number of the students. They are already critically aware, but you always get some who are battling with the way of constructing ideas, the way of expressing ideas, and they learn a lot by going through some basic philosophy before they get into theology, because theology does the faith and reason thing very well. It uses philosophy properly to be able to present its arguments. And I find that with students, when I'm taking them through Aquinas's arguments, they begin to appreciate where he starts. How does he develop each logical idea? What is the step to the next idea? Because some people really need that. Others come in because of previous training and so forth. They've got it already, and they actually are pretty snappy with picking up the theology.
And yet, at the end of the day, assuming that you work your way through the program, and we all know students who have been here, who've gone through all of the courses and graduated, there is, at the end of the day, that commonality of experience and they leave the university with the kind of education that I think they were searching for. Now, I say that because George Del Corral writes that as I was preparing to attend this lecture, I mentioned to my friend who the speakers were. He asked me after that, what do they have in common? And my immediate response was, they are Catholic. He said, I'd love to hear it again and again tonight. So it's sort of in the time that we have left, let's try to start closing the circle a little bit in our conversation, because that notion of being Catholic, but as the previous questioner was asking, to think critically, to know how to think as much as what to think, places us well within the great tradition of Catholic education, of educare, to draw out, but then to help that vacuum to be filled with the truth of and beauty of the Catholic faith. Father, can you talk about that a little bit?
Wow. You kind of set me up here. There is a real sense in which once you start learning how to learn, mm-hmm. then you approach other things in your world in the same way. And so they are equipped with a lot more than simply knowing the content of course X, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, and Sister, that anchoring of any authentically Catholic institution in the long 2,000-year history of Catholic education means teaching the truth, but then also being really on the cutting edge of what it means to educate fully, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. I think if we talk about the future of Catholic higher education, I think there are three avenues that come together, three streams. And one is Catholic identity that we've spelled out tonight in a number of different ways, that Catholic is who we are and what we claim to be. That claim to be Catholic has to be authentic. And the second thing is that we evangelize the culture because we understand the inherent imago Dei, the image of God that undergirds our own creation as a human person. We can't but help then reach out and help others understand their transcendent destiny. And we do that, especially in Catholic Distance University, through the medium of social communication, which is the digital culture. And I think the third stream is the forming of missionary disciples. You know, the teacher is absolutely critical to the Catholic educational institution because the teacher embodies, personifies the gospel. And in fact, we go back to the word witness that our Holy Fathers have used so many times, and we're struck that witness is the definition of the word martyr. And so it's the laying down of one's life for the truths of the faith, for that encounter with Jesus Christ that we have had. And we are about forming the missionary disciples who follow the path from Pentecost itself. The church has always been a communicating church because our God is a Trinitarian and communicating God. And Christ, the perfect communicator, the perfect man. And it is our privilege then to take that and echo it and hand it on to the next generation.
Yeah, John Henry Newman, blessed John Henry Newman, we've been talking, you mentioned, Sister, earlier that you can't spend very much time in an authentic Catholic university without running across saints. Well, let's turn to one who's been beatified, at least, he's blessed, John Henry Newman, with a rather profound understanding, not just of the faith, but also of what an authentic university is supposed to be. And looking at sort of through the lens of Newman and great educators, where would you put a completely online digital university within that tradition of what John Henry Newman would consider to be a good and faithful university?
Well, we speak of the content of the curriculum. We speak of the mission. We speak of the stewardship of those who are responsible. I believe one document calls it scholastic solidarity. We are all forming a community supporting that mission. We're focused on the student as the recipient of learning or engaging them in learning. And of course, university requires the teacher, the educator, who is there not only witnessing to it, but sharing that, echoing that message. So I think Catholic Distance University is true to its mission. Its content is faithful. Its focus is on the student and the common good, the good of the church. You know, we can say that Catholic education is a charism. You know, sacraments are.
Hello?
Oops, I think we lost Sister there for a second. I have an idea. Go ahead, Father.
Add a point to what Sister was saying.
To that mission is really a gift to the church.
All right, Father, you want to add to that? I know.
Yeah, Newman talks a lot about the character of the student and how the character is formed. In his language, he uses, we're forming young students as gentlemen. And of course, today that sounds very pretentious and archaic. But in fact, they had a very clear idea of what a gentleman is. And a gentleman is somebody who knows how to function in the world and is able to do good in the world. It's the old idea of the all-round, well-formed human being.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are just that. We do, and we certainly try to. Well, we are just about out of time. Before we go, however, I'd like to sort of go to each of you and just to ask you from your personal experience, if you can, not to put you on the spot in any way, but your favorite memory about your association with CDU. I'll start with you, Sister.
Well, I think it was in that sacraments course that after a student filled out the evaluation, he said he was so moved by the class on penance that he went to confession for the first time in 15 years. Now, there was nothing that motivated him to do that other than sharing the truth of the gospel. And I think the second most favorite memory is giving the degree to that prisoner for CDU's graduate program. And I certainly thank CDU for the opportunity of being associated with such a profoundly contemporary mission of the church.
Yeah, Father?
For me, it's the couple of students who are members of the Anglican Ordinariate who come to us to take maybe their shorter single course or whatever, and to be able to be in conversation with them, it's extraordinarily rich what they see and what they're experiencing and the awe that they have for the tradition of the church.
Yeah, well, it's very appropriate that Marianne, as president of CDU, you have the last say tonight.
I would have to say that for me, it's been the encounter with students over the years, the very rich variety of adult students I have met, the example of their lives. Speaking of the Anglican Ordinariate, I think about Father Stephen Hill, who was an Anglican priest in Brisbane, Australia, and he found CDU. He did the MA program. He was an engineer. He converted, and he came for graduation with his parents. And at our graduation luncheon, he shared a letter from the Vatican. He had been accepted to study for the priesthood. He is now the first priest of the Anglican Ordinariate in Australia. And that journey started at CDU.
Yeah.
And there are many examples. I think about a prison inmate, Clayton Fountain, who was a notorious murderer of 6 people. He had a conversion experience, and he was working on his master's when he died of a massive heart attack. But he had been accepted as a lay brother in a Catholic religious community in Missouri. Just, so many stories like that that have really changed my life. And really, it's a privilege to be able to accompany these remarkable people who have found CDU.
Very much so. Well, we are sadly out of time for our webinar this evening. I do have to extend my congratulations to Marianne, Dr. Marianne Evans-Mount, for 35 years. It's a remarkable accomplishment in any walk of life, but even more so in Catholic education, given all of the obstacles, challenges, and even enemies that are out there now. So congratulations, and we look forward to the next 35.
Thank you, Matthew.
And on behalf of CDU, the Catholicism University, again, my thanks to Dr. Mount, Sister Brendan, and Father Bevel. Thank you for being here. You will probably be hearing from me for a future webinar, so I hope you'll come back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.
That concludes our presentation this evening. I'm Matthew Bunson on behalf of the Catholic Distance University. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Please go to cdu.edu for a lot more information about the university. We have a host of offerings, as we've heard just this evening. You will be receiving emails, for those of you who registered, on how to find the link to watch this program again. Please pass it along to friends and anyone else who might be interested in the Catholic Distance University. That concludes our business tonight. Until next time, when we have another topic relevant to the life of the Church, the world, Catholics living in the world, please take care, God bless, and I hope you have a very blessed October. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.